All right, good morning. Good morning, everyone. We're exploring the rich and complicated history of Christianity and studying the Bible in context. We identify bad theology and misconceptions about God, the Bible, about hell, and following Jesus' teachings. If you find the video helpful, please let us know in the comment section below. We'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences. All right, so we're continuing on studying faith and sexuality, the clobber passages. We've hit Leviticus at this point, probably the most famous and most misused verse. So here's a few questions for you today. What are the holiness codes? Who were they written for? What does Leviticus really teach? What the Bible actually forbids? How should we interpret Leviticus? And of course, what this topic teaches us. So we're going to take a look at all of those, hopefully answer some questions for you. Let's talk about the clobber passages, the holiness codes. What again are the clobber passages? It's a set of verses used to justify condemning and excluding members of the LGBTQ community. And of course, the most famous is from Leviticus, man shall not lie with man. Here's a billboard, actual billboard out there, right? You shall not lie with a man as with a woman. It is an abomination, signed God. And of course, they have the famous love the sinner, hate the sin, which, well, you know, one of those bumper sticker things that I've talked about before. I love that it's paid for by concerned Christians. Oh, they're so concerned for us. Leviticus 18:22, Leviticus 20:13. The verses are almost identical. There's a little bit of difference between the two. I'll talk about that a little bit. Oh, here's Pastor Bruce to tell us that the Bible is very clear. Thou shalt not lie with mankind as with womankind. It is an abomination. Well, not quite so clear, really. See, it may be clear in our English translation and then our interpretation of that English translation, but it isn't clear in the original languages. You see, Hebrew is full of euphemisms, especially when it comes to sex. They're not very clear about what sexual acts are going on, and so they kind of hide it in a whole bunch of euphemistic languages. This is a quote from Amy Jill Levine. Leviticus 18:22, translated literally from the Hebrew, says, "And with a man not will you lie the lyings of a woman." And the lyings of a woman actually means bedding, not have the bedding of a woman. It's an abomination. Leviticus 20:13 says basically the same thing, but it adds the penalty of capital punishment. In other words, if you get caught doing this, you could be put to death. But, you know, in the whole history of the holiness codes and some of these death penalties, there's no real evidence that they ever applied these. No real evidence that they ever actually used these. It's very hard to convict somebody of this because, one, you had to have two witnesses to see it. And generally, you know, when you're doing this, you don't have two witnesses. You're kind of off doing it in private somewhere. But it adds the capital punishment. Okay, so here's what Amy Jill Levine has to say. We do not know. We do not know what the lyings of a woman are. We have no idea. It's one of those Hebrew euphemisms, okay? And the only times the term appears are in Leviticus 18:22 and 20:13. Only appears twice in the Bible, both in the same command, and we're not quite sure what it actually means. If the text had simply said, don't put your penis in the following locations, we'd have a better idea of what it meant. But God didn't say that, apparently. But actually what it is, it's the Hebrew writers. They're using a euphemism. They're using an ancient euphemism that the original readers, the original listeners would have understood. But here in the 21st century, as Gentile English speakers, we're not quite sure what it is. Thus, even if we conclude that in relation to male addressees, if this is talking to males only, the lyings of a woman is an idiom, possibly, for men. But we are speculating. We think that's what it means. We're not sure, but we think that's what it means. So it would only apply to males and only this one specific act. That's really different from a sexual orientation of gay or lesbian or bisexual. Very different. It forbids one specific act, not a particular sexual orientation. The holiness codes. Now, the book of Leviticus includes instructions to the Israelite priest and to the people. Notice I highlighted Israelites. This is not a book of instruction to humanity. This is not a book of instruction to all people in the world. It was a book of instruction specifically to the Israelites, to the priest and to the people. Includes all kinds of interesting stuff. To the Israelite people, they explain how to be set apart, how to be holy. That's what the holiness codes are about. You're about to enter into the land of Canaan. And when you get there, you need to be different. Well, I don't want you acting like the Egyptians that you came from, and I don't want you acting like the Canaanites who are there. I want you to be different. I want you to be set apart. And that's what holiness means, set apart. The holiness code isn't meant for 21st century Christians. Let me say that again, just in case you missed it. The holiness code is not meant for 21st century Christians. The holiness code was meant for a very specific people in a very specific place during a very specific time. It's not applicable to 21st century Gentile Christians living here in the United States. It wasn't written for that purpose. And so to try to use it as a rule book or a law book is to do violence to interpreting the text. All right, so let's take a look at the holiness codes. Look here, we got Leviticus 1:2. Speak unto the children of Israel and say unto them. Then we just bump down. Speak unto the children of Israel saying. 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 And say unto them, right? All throughout Leviticus, and these are only about 5 of them. But all throughout the book of Leviticus, over and over again, it says, speak unto the children of Israel. So who was this intended for, do you think? The children of Israel. Because who are they speaking to? The children of Israel. Over and over it says this. Does it say, speak unto the Gentiles? No. Does it say, speak unto the Canaanites? Does it say, speak unto the Egyptians? No. Does it say, speak unto all humanity for all time forward? No. Speak unto the children of Israel. Now, I checked my bloodline. No Israelites. I'm as white as they come. The holiness codes. This phrasing appears throughout Leviticus. The holiness codes were written to the ancient Israelites so they could be different and set apart from the Canaanites who they were going to go dwell amongst. It isn't intended for anyone else. So just on the face of it, when we look at Leviticus, it doesn't apply to us. It's not written to us. It's not addressed to us. The holiness code also applied to a specific place, the land of Canaan. When they entered into what was to be known as the Holy Land, the Lord said to Moses, speak to the Israelites and say to them, I am the Lord your God. You must not do as they do in Egypt, where you used to live, and you must not do in the land of Canaan as they do in the land of Canaan, where I am bringing you. Do not follow their practices. So this is specifically when you enter into the promised land, into the land of Canaan, you are to behave in a certain manner, to set you apart, to make you different. So a specific people in a very specific place. This is why that area today is referred to as the Holy Land. How many people have seen advertisements for tours of the Holy Land? This is why it's called that. Because this is where the Israelites were to be set apart and to be a holy people, different from everyone else. It is set apart, and it's where the nation is to be different and holy. So, how many of you are now currently living in the Holy Land? None of us. So it doesn't apply to us. This was a set of behaviors to the ancient Israelites while they dwelt in the Holy Land. It didn't apply to people living elsewhere. Finally, the Holiness Code had a specific time. It began when they crossed the River Jordan. Once they entered the Holy Land and began to occupy it and live there, that's when these rules began to apply. And it had a very specific end. When did the Holiness Code end? Christ. Christ is the end of the law so that there may be righteousness for everyone who believes. Romans 10:4. When Christ came and he died and he was resurrected, that was an end of the Holiness Code. Because no longer would it be a certain set of people who were to be different, but Christ was calling all of humanity into himself, and the rules changed. If Gentiles could now be followers of the Messiah, if Gentiles could now be followers of Christ, then we needed a different set of rules so that all people could come and that the Holiness Code would not be a stumbling stone for them and prevent them from entering into this relationship with Christ. The Holiness Code ended when Christ came. Even if these verses prohibited, let's suppose they did, they only applied to the ancient Israelites while they were living in the Holy Land and are no longer in force because Christ has resurrected. Even if that's what they actually say, if we assume it is. Remember, we don't know what the actual euphemism means. We're guessing. But even that's what they say. That was a rule for a specific people in a specific place during a specific time. As Gentiles, the Holiness Code never applied to us. That was one of the big questions that the early church had. You know, as Gentiles began to become followers of Jesus, all the Jewish followers are like, well, what do we do with them? Should they get circumcised? Should they eat kosher? Should they do all these other things? that we as Jewish people do that set us apart? And they had a big meeting about it. Well, first Peter had a vision. Peter has this big vision, and it's like, these don't apply anymore. Paul has his thing going on. He's like, well, they're full of the Holy Spirit, so apparently God doesn't care. Jerusalem Council meets and they say, you know what? We're going to stick 2 rules on them because there are 2 things that we find completely abhorrent. Don't eat meat sacrificed to idols, and don't eat meat that's been strangled. That's just, okay? But other than that, they're in. They don't have to do any of the things that we've been doing in the holiness codes. The holiness codes don't apply anymore. Anybody know why it was 2 things related to meat? So you could sit down and have table fellowship without offending each other. Just, you don't eat certain things. It's like why you provide, a vegetarian or a vegan option at most, family gatherings nowadays, so that you can have table fellowship. As Gentile Christians, Paul repeatedly taught that the holiness codes were not to be followed. The Jerusalem Council in Acts affirmed this. So, even if they were somehow to apply outside of the Jewish people, they're gone. They're finished. They're over with. And as Paul and the Jerusalem Council and Peter all taught, sorry, these holiness codes do not apply to the Gentiles. We're not following them anymore. They're null and void. And what I find amazing is that even with the authority of the Bible that evangelical Christians give to it, even with all the authority that they put upon the Bible, even with the apostolic witness of Peter and Paul and the entire Jerusalem Council, they disagree. They go against what they say. They're like, we don't care what the apostles say. We don't care what the Bible says. We want these codes in there. And can we have the death penalty too? Because that would be really cool. There were 2 different kinds of laws, says Pastor Bruce, ceremonial and moral. And so I've heard this argument a million times, and there's probably people who might be watching this arguing the same point. It was the ceremonial laws that were done away with. Eating kosher, wearing mixed fabrics, those kind of things. And doing sacrifices, sacrificing little lambs. We don't want to do that anymore, right? Those were all ceremonial stuff, and all that was done away. But the moral laws still stand. Anybody find a problem with that? Here's the problem with that. Okay. Oh, he says Jesus did away with the ceremonial law like eating kosher. The moral laws still stand. First, that's not the way the ancient Israelites divided their laws. They didn't divide them into moral laws and ceremonial laws. You know who does that? Modern Gentile Christians. But that's not the way the ancient Hebrews did it. It's not even the way the modern Hebrews do it. Modern Jewish people don't divide it that way either. Ancient Israelites divided their law differently. The ancient Israelites divided the law into the holiness codes and the righteousness codes. The laws between God and man, the laws between man and man, or human being and human being. In other words, if you want to be set apart, if you want to be different, you got to follow these things. But all these things over here, living and loving your neighbor, those all still apply. Ah, I see. Okay, well, then Paul and the early church agreed that the holiness codes were no longer applicable, but the righteousness codes still applied to everyone. The righteousness codes still applied to everyone. Gotcha. See? Oh, see? So if you're one of those nasty LGBTQ people, you're unrighteous. It's bad. It's a righteousness code thing. Actually, it's not. How do I know it's not? Because of where it appears in the Bible, right? So Leviticus 18:22 and 20:13 prohibitions are part of the holiness code, okay? Because they appear in the whole book. That's all about the holiness code, not about moral codes. And it's listed amongst a whole bunch of other holiness code objects. But let us just say, just for the sake of argument, assume that the Leviticus prohibition is still in effect. Somehow it's still in effect. What does this tell us? It cannot be considered a blanket condemnation of homosexuality because it only covers one specific act, and only for one member of it. Lesbian relationships are excluded because this is addressed only to males. So the LGBTQ community, we've just let all the L's go free. It's about male penetrative acts. So all the ladies, off the hook. Okay? Other sexual acts are excluded. It only mentions one act, not a sexual orientation. So all those others apparently are just fine. You just can't do this one thing. This can't be considered a blanket condemnation of all gay and lesbian relationships or a homosexual orientation since it covers only one specific male act. But there are other possible readings. Again, this is some kind of euphemism that we're not sure of. What are some of the other possible readings that might go with this? The act of one man penetrating another has possible interpretations depending on how you read the chapter. Now remember, chapters and verses in the Bible are artificial. We added them later. And so depending on how you divide it up, you might get different interpretations. Possibly this is a condemnation of incestuous male-male relationships, given that verses 6 through 18 describe various incestuous relationships. So is it part of don't do these incestuous relationships, or is it part of something else? This may be a cultural taboo based on the shift in verses 19 through 20. That is why it would be referred to as an abomination, which means taboo. Also means it's disgusting. Oh, don't do that. There are a lot of taboo things in a lot of cultures. Some of them make sense to us, some of them don't. But that particular culture considers it kind of a disgusting thing to do. So it just may be a cultural taboo that they've put in there. Do not approach a woman to have sexual relationships during the uncleanliness of her monthly period. Now, some people have a fetish for that. Others are like, no, that's gross. Don't do that. It's like a cultural taboo. Do not have sexual relationship with your neighbor's wife and defile yourself with her. See, these are the verses preceding it. So some of them seem like, I don't know what's going on here. There's this shift in this chapter. Should we have divided the chapter somewhere else? So depending on where you divide the chapter, because all our divisions are artificial, we have a hard time deciding where this verse belongs to. It may be based on temple prostitution and idolatry. In this list of prohibited sexual favors come an odd command that doesn't fit at first glance. They seem to fit in. Just before the prohibition of a man lying with a man in Leviticus 18:22 comes this verse, verse 21. Do not give any of your children to be sacrificed to Moloch, for you must not profane the name of your God. I am the Lord. Why is there suddenly just this odd command in there about not giving your children to Moloch, and then men shall not lie with men as they do with women? See, if we're suddenly switched over to things that are happening about Canaanite religion, does this verse also belong to Canaanite religion? Is this part of the temple prostitution going on? Because during certain festivals and things like that, male priests would dress up like women and sell themselves. And it was part of the religious practice. Moloch was one of the Canaanite gods. He was worshipped by sacrificing human children to him. Right after this prohibition to not participate in pagan idol worship by sacrificing children to Moloch comes the prohibition of men lying with men and women mating with animals. Both of these practices were part of the Canaanite religious rituals. So it would seem that this is, hey, don't get involved in practicing religion like they do in Canaanite temples. Maybe that's what this verse is really all about. Now, I tend to agree with Amy Jill Levine because she's a Hebrew scholar. They're the people who wrote the book. They would probably have the best idea what it means. Okay, I agree with her. God should have said, and just named the place. It just would have made things so much easier, rather than using euphemistic language. That's one of the great things about deaf culture and ASL, for anybody who doesn't know. They tend to be very straightforward. They don't have a lot of euphemisms. Okay, they tend to just say it as it is, and that would just clear up so much communication. So much communication. Okay? The original writers and readers knew what this phrase meant. Today, it is ambiguous at best. Whether you consider it not in force, because it was written to a specific people in a specific place at a specific time, or even if it is in force, it is still ambiguous what exactly it means. But what we can tell you is it's not about a sexual orientation. We must humbly and truthfully acknowledge that this text is ambiguous. We really don't know. It's a bit ambiguous here. It's not very clear. My best guess is that this is a holiness code based on the taboo against adult males being penetrated. It was considered really disgusting if an adult male allowed himself to be penetrated. Or this could be a prohibition against engaging in practices associated with Canaanite worship. I think those are the two best choices. Either a cultural taboo or they're prohibiting Canaanite temple practices. One of those two. Best guess. So, having heard this, how do we live this out? What should we do about this? What can we do with this information? Well, first off, Christian supposed scholars, and I definitely put scholars in quote there. Let's face it, evangelical and fundamentalist scholarship is not very good. It's not peer-reviewed. They just keep regurgitating the same thing, making assertions, bold assertions, without any kind of evidence whatsoever, and they twist Scripture and take it out of context constantly. That's why they've had to publish their own supposed scholarly magazines to publish this nonsense in. Okay, but Christian scholars, teachers, and preachers need to be honest about what is clearly understood and what is ambiguous. We need to stop saying this is clear when it's not. And then we should certainly not be going around condemning people if it's not very clear. In the case of ambiguity, I believe that we need to lean towards grace and inclusion rather than leaning hard into legalism and condemnation. Remember, Having faith isn't stubbornly holding on to incorrect teaching. Some people are like, nope, that's what I was taught, and that's all I'm going to believe. I'm going to hold on to my faith. Okay, being obstinate isn't faith. It's being obstinate. Faith is imitating Christ. It's seeking truth and becoming more Christ-like all the time. That's what faith is. And if Christ comes and he reinterpreted the law for us, then maybe it's time for us to look back at what applies and what doesn't apply, and to look at our teaching to make sure it always aligns with Christ. Sure, something may be in the Bible, making it biblical, but it may not be loving or Christ-like. Well, once again, if you found today's content helpful, please be sure to subscribe to our channel, ring the bell, give it a big thumbs up, like and share this video. You can even help sponsor our weekly videos if you want. You can see Deborah about that. All these things help our community here and online in our growing YouTube channel, so we thank you so much for being here, and especially if you made it all the way to the end of the video here. You are dismissed.
We are one in Christ, we are one in God, we are one in unity. We are one in truth, we are one in